We have a bit of a problem. Let's turn that off. We have a bit of a problem. I was in Montreal last week. I interviewed, talked with some of our marketing reps. The DFHSN product is having its marketplace eaten alive by DMSOS. The problem is that the SMS strategy is being weakened and future products are being exposed by the lack of DFHSN's acceptance. When the branches go to the regions, they don't get enough support. The regions are kind of lukewarm on the value and meaning of DFSMS. What I'd like you to do, given the diversity of backgrounds and areas you have, is to give me some input on how we can go back to Canada and help them, with Tucson's help, straighten out the marketing situation there. In other parts of the world and other parts of the U.S., there's been no problem whatsoever with DFHSN penetration. For some reason in Quebec and in Montreal in particular, we're in trouble. I have a couple of ideas. My background is very limited and peculiar. If you can share your ideas with me, then I would be willing to carry that message back to Canada and perhaps straighten that marketplace out.
All right, let's give Bill some feedback. What's his central message?
He wants to go to Canada.
No, it's back to Canada.
I'm sorry, back to Canada. This time take me with you.
Now, was there any other central message?
Absolutely not.
In pragmatist.
In Canada, DFHSN has got serious competitive problems.
Okay.
And Bill's basically soliciting help in developing an approach out of us to go combat that.
Okay. Anybody hear any other central message?
I heard there's a problem in marketing marketing that product in Canada, in particular in Quebec, which tells me it's a French-speaking area, and it was developed in Tucson, and he needs some help trying to resolve that.
Okay. Anybody hear anything else? Meaning of the message is what? What did he say it meant to us as listeners?
We've got to help fix
There's a problem. There's a problem that has to be fixed.
Okay.
He's asking for our
He's
help.
asking for
Yeah,
feedback.
He's
right.
asking for our help in
That's
developing a solution to the problem.
Okay. Anything else for him? Come on, Bill. Get your take. What's next? You gotta go? Okay.
Help me before you do. Which was the
Seconds, I want every one of you to come to understand the importance of what we've done with data and memory in the last year. This is a corporate strategy that is going to bring benefit to our customers in terms of throughput, performance, capacity, and the overall availability and benefit of our systems.
Okay, now time. Bill, not bad, but even more energy now. I want you to really stretch and really feel as though it's outrageous as you deliver this.
Every one of our customers needs what data and memory gives. Each one of us is responsible for bringing that message forward. The more we know about it, the more effectively we can communicate that strategy to the people who need to use it today. Our sales force, our marketing reps, our area staffs, our people in the labs. Our competitors would not dare to have something as big as this.
Even more.
More?
Even more.
yeah, a little low key.
Right, a little low key.
Screen.
Nobody but the IBM Corporation could deliver something of this magnitude. None of our competitors would dare to enter the marketplace claiming the synergisms that we can achieve between hardware and software. The key thing is we use processor storage to displace I/O activity. Only a vendor that participates in both ends of that equation can try to develop a strategy with this power and depth. In details, we'll talk about later. The overall message is we can bring better solutions to every one of our customers with currently available products. Nobody else can. Let's use this strength. Let's build on our synergism. We have an opportunity. Let's go for it.
Okay. Give me some feedback. I told it.
Hey!
How do you do? Energy level was down.
Now, he did use a lot of energy to support that message, didn't he?
A little bit shy.
And how did it come across to the listeners? What was your sense of it?
Still constrained a little bit. Could let your gestures go a little more.
Yes, similar gesture a lot, Bill. If you
Too
could
much
switched it around a little bit.
What came through is commitment to me, and enthusiasm.
Now, is it important that we sense that from him? Okay. Any other feedback? You were going to say
The
something.
enthusiasm, I mean, it was very enthusiastic speech. I wanted to help in any possible way.
Okay.
It was clearly a, I would call it, sales pitch. That means he made no doubt where his position is and what
Yes.
he thinks is right.
Okay, now is that good or is that bad, that it's a
Depends
sales
on the
pitch?
situation.
Okay,
I
why?
think if I walk in and a customer and make this strong pitch, he says he has that position and you better make sure that the other part has the same position, otherwise it will fade out and will say, well, I cannot
Yes.
really discuss that better with him.
Okay, any other feedback for him? Did he show the same level of commitment throughout?
Well, he peaked.
He peaked.
He
And
peaked
then
in
what
the
happened?
middle, and then he came down a little.
And
But
then
he
it
tried
started
to, he
to
started
trail,
coming
it's
back
like,
up again.
oh, I'm not too sure where I'm going with this one. And you'll see that on the tape. And then doesn't the energy level tend to come down? Not that there won't be some variations in that during a talk. Clearly there will be, but I just want you to see what happens. Typically, as the energy level comes down, speaker makes it all verbal, gets nice and comfortable and stays that way the rest of the talk, which did not happen here, fortunately. Okay, anything else for him?
If you're gonna over dramatize for the practice of it, I found his hand gestures being two-dimensional, always this way, except one like here, but always this way, versus I think a technique would be to lower the voice for just a second and then come forward with one that comes this way.
I tried to
the
start
audience.
out with a
So that you're
stride
You,
forward.
you,
part,
you
but
started
I
out
did
with that
different.
stride forward, you aggressively attacked us.
Yeah.
Then he calmed down a little.
Then he ran to the table. Gotta be a little careful about this. We're working to plan these gestures. It may start to look a little canned. So you want to think about that. I want you to do this. I want you to think about what you do normally to gesture, one-to-one, when the pressure's off. Watch others, become aware of what they do. But then, when you get up to the front of the room to deliver the talk, you want it to just come out. You want it to flow normally and naturally.
No, Bill, he never did that.
Come on, Bill. I thought I got some movement there.
I talked about the value of the concept of data memory for our customers. What I'd like to do now is take us to the next step, which is talk about the meaning of it in terms of how new applications can come into being. Data and memory is a two-stage process.
Now, a little longer as you talk to us. Finish the thought with each person, Bill.
A customer using XA will find for interactive transactions that about 90% of the time is spent doing I/O.
Now, you want to introduce that. Tell us what the whole thing is before you get into the meaning. Just generally what's up there.
This chart depicts the two-step process of achieving real customer benefit
There you go.
through MVS ESA, use of data and memory function. In XA and before, 90% of the time is spent doing I/O. Using ESA functions, we can cut the I/O in half, which gives direct and immediate benefits in throughput and performance and capacity. I call that using ESA a little. What I challenge our customers to do is to use ESA a lot, to take these faster transactions, which are doing the same thing as was done originally, and add additional function. So you get augmented transactions that can now solve new business problems. Here's the bottom line. The old way, 10 units of time to get the old kind of transaction done. Using ESA data and memory, I cut the I/O in half and still do the same thing. But now when I add new functions, when I double this ESA transaction, my new transaction with twice as much function takes 11 units of time. It's only 10% longer than its XA ancestor. But in exchange for that 10% elongation in response time, I doubled the thinking. I doubled the computational density of the transaction. That's using ESA a lot. That's what I challenge our customers to do when they get into the data and memory concept. Thank you.
All right. How'd Bill do?
Tough graphic.
Busy.
Too busy.
I mean, I got the point from XA to ESA, but I think I still missed the point to ESA plus.
Okay.
Bill, I don't think you needed the bullets at the bottom.
Didn't need these?
I think you should have stayed with the others,
With the
because
fingers.
that was cool.
Yeah,
If you
okay.
really wanted to do that, throw that on a final, you said, let me net that out for you, okay? And those could have been the couple of points on your final flow.
Yeah, it's
I think
funny,
you did
because
that
when I
wrong.
draw it, I just draw this, this, and this.
And
I
that
don't
would
draw
have
the
been-
arrows.
You could almost do just a plain graph, a line going down, which is, transactions per unit of CPU or something,
Mhm.
labeled XA, ESA, ESA plus, and you do everything else in words.
Okay.
Yeah, you could, couldn't you?
It
And wouldn't we
didn't
tend to
need
remember
Right.
that a lot easier? else for him?
Yeah, a couple of things could have helped me more. One, a title chart, I mean, that's the advantage of ESA. The other one, you're showing that ESA is more positive, more value. Had you reversed the order, so you had XA on the bottom and ESA on the top, so moving from low to high, would have been more effective.
Yeah, I wanted to stage it specifically in order of time, starting with the present, step one, step two, but
Yeah.
you're right.
But that kind of graph that Dave explained, I think could handle that pretty nicely over time, yes.
Moving
I'll tell you
down.
another thing I would have done, I think, though, and that's I'd try to make my final not, you end up with 10 and 11. I think I'd have wanted to tell them what you could still do with the 10. Or not expand anything else out.
Oh, well, that's just the mathematics of it. I'd take
I know,
more
but
IO
but you
and
could
then
you
double
could
it.
have done that in different ways to get that down to the factory, saying, hey, for the exact same, here's what more you got.
Okay.
You also spent some time talking to the chart, which I really turned around facing and pointing, and I got distracted there.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was better when he was out here,
When you were
wasn't it?
talking to us, you
Yeah,
had more of my
you'll see that
attention.
when you look at the
I
table.
don't know. I like
Yes.
that.
That was the only point I was gonna make. I mean, the gestures, you kind of talked to it, and those gestures were good. But if you had to do this, maybe just done it out
Right,
front.
yeah, going like,
Yeah.
Well, is it wrong to get the audience to focus not on his eye contact, but on a specific point on the chart? The-
Nope, nothing wrong with
And
that.
that was
as long as I don't try to
fair.
do two things at once. If I'm doing this, it's wrong, but if I'm saying, look at this, and then I stop and
Yeah,
go back.
I mean,
that might-
you got me up to the 9 units of time versus 1 for XA, and I went right up there because you drew me.
Yeah, but won't you go up there this way too? If
No,
I'm pointing
no,
to it.
I don't think so. I liked it better when he did it, because he went like this. Okay, at that point.
He surrounded it. That
Yeah,
didn't
but
bother,
if it's
that didn't
like
bother me.
this, I miss you.
Yeah, he had to talk to the chart. That was the exact point. I had the
Right.
opposite problem that you did.
Okay.
That when
Better
he
do it
turned
like
to talk to the
this.
chart in order to do the breadth is when I.
Think about yourselves in your current jobs, but emphasize those moments you have contact with customers. I want you to think about what they use the computer for, what applications they've got. That's what I'm going to focus on. What I'd like you to do as I talk is listen to my words and watch my eyes. Okay.
And what do you want to work on?
What I'm working on is eye contact.
Okay.
Good morning. We've had 2 sessions so far to talk about data and memory. I'm going to take you a little bit farther into what data and memory is, and I'm going to ask you to look at what customers are doing today and think about what they could be doing tomorrow using all of the capabilities that we're bringing in the current set of products. In order to understand this, though, I'm going to spend a few moments to take you through what an interactive transaction does so you feel comfortable with what the data memory capabilities are. As you see and understand the multitude of products that support data and memory, I think you'll get a warm feeling that we've got a lot of benefits to offer customers. Most importantly, I don't want you to memorize acronyms. I haven't got an alphabet soup chart here, but I do want you to get a sense of how these things might play in a customer's shop. So, let me show you a brief history of the transaction. When someone hits the enter key on a computer, the transaction flies through the network and gets in, and then what happens is you do some computing, and then you get some information. You do some computing, then you write some information, etc. Over 90% of the elapsed time spent in a transaction is spent doing I/O operations, either reading or writing data or other stuff. There are typically 30 to 50 I/O operations for every interactive transaction. That is, from the time you hit the enter key till you get the results back, the computer's spending most of its time talking to DASI devices. What we're doing in ESA is coming up with a menu of techniques to replace each one of these I/O operations with a memory-to-memory access, or spending a little more computing to get rid of some I/O. Now, when you do that, a couple of different things happen at the same time. The first thing is, if I can replace this I/O with some computing, the elapsed time of the transaction is going to drop, take less time. I/O operations take hundredths of a second. The computing necessary to replace it takes a millionth of a second. The second thing that happens is, because I keep the information in board, the amount of requirement I have for service from my DASD, my channel, my control unit, all that external stuff goes down, and I can sum that up if I save an I/O operation in this transaction and an I/O operation in that transaction. My total requirement just went down by 2, one for each. The third thing that happens, and this was serendipity, it turns out for every I/O that I do, I'm going to spend some CPU setting it up and some more taking it down at the end. The amount of computing it takes to move stuff inside memory is less than the amount of computing it takes to set up and handle the I/O. So for every I/O I get rid of, I get CPU back. By using data in memory in ESA, I cut my demand for DASD I/O capacity, and I recover CPU capacity. Nothing's free. What we do is we spend storage. Storage goes up, CPU and DASD go down. When you sum those effects up across a system, here's what happens to a transaction. Another way of saying that 90% of the I/O content would be in a bar graph form. I've got 9 parts of I/O to 1 part CPU in an existing XA mode transaction. By using ESA techniques, whether it's VSAM files or DF sort hypersorting or catalog reduction or program fetch I/O reduction or putting directories in, and it doesn't matter, I can cut the I/O I'm going to assert just straightforward in half. I'm just going to cut the I/O in half. This transaction does the same thing as that one. It just does it faster. There's also a reduction in CPU. This should probably be 0.95 to be a little more accurate. Doesn't matter. What I want to talk about is not using ESA a little, but using ESA a lot, going the next step. Suppose a naive end user comes to you. That's a redundant phrase, isn't it? Naive end user says, I know, why don't I take the number off this report and put it right into the second screen of this transaction? Because every time I'm working on this transaction, I got to stop, go to the report, turn to page 3, find a number, and copy it over. The end user says, I know that that report's in the system somewhere, so the number's in the computer. Simple, isn't it? But when your systems programmers do the analysis, they discover that this report runs once a month because it takes a month to run, right? It's the sum of all the information you've got plus hours you spend with networks, third-party services, getting the data. In other words, the information content of that number is very high. Whereas this transaction is the most rapidly growing, response time sensitive, mission critical transaction in your establishment. Recognizing this mismatch, you respond to the end user by saying, dear end user, based on the projected impact on system capacity, due to the recent deferral of a hardware upgrade, and prioritizing your requirement with all the other requirements from the other end users we love as much, we've scheduled your upgrade for the 25th month of the backlog. You just said, no. In ESA, you have the ability to go back to this improved transaction, doing the same thing, and add additional function. I'm going to double that new transaction. Now, if I take this and double its function, just right off the top, using ESA techniques so that the new function is spending resources the same rate as the old one, my new transaction in ESA will take 2 parts of CPU and 9 parts I/O for a total of 11 units of time. It's 10% longer, but it's doing twice as much thinking. That's feasible. It's a little longer, but it's feasible. The important point is, if you try to do the new function in the XA environment, if I take my original transaction profile, it's 1 to 9, and double that, I get a new profile that's 2 parts of CPU and 18 parts of I/O, and that cannot be done. Either 20 units a time is too long, or the amount of I/O you're driving into the system, the amount of requirement you have for capacity from your channels, that 18 units of I/O represents, can't be sustained. In other words, you can't do this, but you can do this. And the only way to get from here to here is to go here first. You use ESA a little, and then you use ESA a lot. When you talk to customers, ask them what their applications are. Remind yourself of why the customer really bought the computer. I want to talk about what an architecture is. We all have a notion. I used to think, I was a technologist, I grew up in Myers Corners. I used to think this right here was the architecture. That line between hardware and software, principles of operation, describes the texture of that line. That's a technologist's view of an architecture. Principles of operation isn't everything, it's just the beginning. If I go forward in time, we see each processor had an operating system and a subsystem that exploited it. But nobody buys a computer for one of these things. The only reason they buy a computer is to run applications. And applications also go through evolution. An application comes into being because it gives your business a competitive edge. If you're an airline and it's 1966 and you've got an online reservation system, you just won the world. You own it. Over time, your competitors figure out how to do online reservation systems and they become money-making. One of the characteristics of an airline that's successful is they have an online reservation system. After a while, everybody gets it. Pretty soon, everybody's got them. And in fact, there are applications that become obsolete. People's Express went out of business. The CEO of People's Express, in an interview in The Economist this February, said the reason they went out of business was that their airline reservation system was not robust enough to tell People's Express executives who was paying what to go where. People's Express had excellent equipment, good personnel, all the needs they wanted. What they didn't have was a robust enough set of applications so they could even play. The point is, I used to think this was an architecture. I now believe that this is an architecture. You're not using the ESA architecture until you and your customer have identified a competitive edge application that is embedded in this environment that makes use of functions unique to the IMS or CICS or DB2 on that platform. It takes time to get the hardware shipped. It takes time to install the subsystems. It takes time to develop the software. So the question I'd ask you to bring to the customers as you talk with them is, if you're going to compete in the 1992 Olympics, when do you start to train? If you wait until 1991, you'll embarrass yourself. ESA is an opportunity to recraft the capabilities of the machine. With the ESA architecture, you can now embody new kinds of solutions. You can re-examine the business reason behind the application and perhaps connect with what the business needs. Think about how much fun it is to sell in this environment versus here. Here's the customer executive going to his board asking for money in a cost-saving environment. Gentlemen, got to buy a new computer. I'm sorry this is so expensive, but I drove a really great deal out of the vendor. Boring fellow. In this environment, the presentation of the board of directors looks like this. Gentlemen, we are about to become extremely wealthy. I have a new application in mind. It's going to do the following things. It will reduce our cost of doing business. It will improve our customer satisfaction. Our competitors will not be able to match this set of functions. Our internal efficiencies will be as though we just got a 20% increase in headcount of skilled people without any learning curve. Here's the characteristics of this application. Here's how it helps our business. That's an interesting fellow. He understands the business, not just a technologist. Remember the bigger picture. Remember the impact and value of this architecture in this environment. And the premise that you need ESA, the assumption that you have to have this set of hardware and software in place, becomes simply a small investment that should leverage a tremendous return. So, the next time you visit a customer, ask yourself, ask them, what are the key applications? Why did they buy the computer? And how can ESA help make those applications more effective so the customer is more profitable and their investment is more fruitful? Please think about that, and if you run into any situations, call me. Let me know what kinds of problems they've got. We're still gathering requirements. We're still building function into the product. You've got a competitive edge. Let's keep it. Let's work it. Thank you for your time.
Come ahead. Now, what do you think? How'd Bill do?
Good. Well with eye contact.
Excuse me?
He did well with eye contact.
He did, didn't he? Did nicely with that. Okay. How about his energy?
A lot of it.
Good energy.
Now, did that help the talk?
Sure.
Made some difference, didn't it? Anything else for him?
No dialogue.
No dialogue.
Yeah, I think that would have really added an awful lot to the process.
I've even written down a couple questions I forgot to ask.
Well, we won't tell anybody.
He had a relatively complex chart which showed that it would have been very valuable to check by dialogue in between whether the group is still with him.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are some things I could not recreate the bridges from one step to the others.
Yes.
So that would give him a chance to really know,
Yeah.
because it's important that this is understood, and then the rest becomes an easy path.
Yeah. Now, on that last chart, he had that up for a long time, didn't he? Worked with it, wrote on it, and didn't that make a difference as opposed to just quickly flashing up the chart and then moving on? So you can get a lot of value out of that visual if you can leave it up there for a while, as he did. But I think the dialogue really would have added tremendously. And next time he'll probably do it.
Neat contrast on the end, in terms of the fellow with the,
Hey,
spend
yeah.
thing.
And isn't that memorable?
You know, that's something you just gotta,
Yeah. Okay, nicely done. Good work. Who's next?
Message that I want to leave each of you with was that there's value in what we can do with ESA, specific customer applications that can get benefit. What I'd like to know is, have you encountered any applications that in the dealings you've had with customers run into situations where what I've shown might be of value? Anybody here who recalls an application of that type?
she's leaving.
Sure, Selena. Do we have, what I'd like to know is, do we have any situations where you might think, do you have any questions of me as to how I might bring those to bear? If you're familiar with situations, I can discuss how we address those.
Yeah, that's the idea. When you saved me half the computer resource I need to spend to do exactly the same function as I was using yesterday. Wouldn't I just be better off doubling the number of users rather than doubling the number of transactions and computer units I'm utilizing in my business?
What I'm hearing is that the customer has a choice, that given what ESA can do for capacity, isn't it possible instead of investing more in putting out new applications, they can now go and revise their capacity plan?
Or invest less?
Or invest less. The invest less case would come about in a very mature business that was not moving very dynamically. Certainly it's the case that you could go back to the customer and say, you don't need to buy as much. DFSMS had a similar situation. If they're reducing the utilization on DASDAs, my next upgrade take longer. If I print on smaller forms, can I get by with a smaller printer? That does happen. We haven't seen it as a risk. In fact, customers will then give us a kind of a soft justification for improvement in price performance. Any other questions or comments?
Now tie that back to your central message.
The central message is that through using ESA techniques, you can enable new applications. You don't have to. The customer is not forced or compelled to go the second step and use ESA a lot. He has the opportunity to do it. The benefits and performance and throughput and capacity are well documented. We can achieve those unconditionally. Yes?
What you told me is the benefits of using ESA. You did not tell me what the costs are. Tell me what the costs are. How many system programmers you have to hire? How much additional DASD and all the other support you have to do?
The question was, if I go forward with an ESA solution, don't I encounter additional expense? I believe I tried to address that up front by saying there's nothing for free. That while you spend storage, you save CPU and I/O costs. It is a distinct trade-off. From our perspective internally, the margins on memory are better than the margins on processors. And the margins on processors are such we still want to be in that business. So it's not a bad business for IBM to do either. It's excellent for the customer that it allows them to do new things without impacting the way in which they spend resource. The difference would be that with data and memory, you now can go forward. The customer has to make a choice. They're going to send us a check for $10 million. The question is, they ask for a processor or some storage instead.
No, but what does how many system programmers the customer have to hire additional?
No change.
What was the question? I didn't hear it.
The question was, do we need to hire additional systems, programs, or resources? In fact, what we found in many environments is that the use of data memory techniques reduces overall effort. It's less difficult to tune, less difficult to plan capacity. It's a more natural environment and relieves some serious constraints. Are there any other questions?
Now tie that back to your central message. Tie that back to your central message. That was the answer. Take that down.
Well, again, this emphasizes and underscores the fact that we are providing an environment that facilitates actually giving the customer their systems programmers back.
Okay.
Instead of having to devote them to the very difficult problems of tuning I/O configurations, they can select the high leverage applications, pick the low hanging fruit where they get benefits of data and memory, and then through our unique platform, leverage their business. Any other questions?
Bill, I'm a customer of basically 3080X. Okay, I don't have any compute power needs beyond like a 3084, which is equivalent to 200. And by God, I'm getting these offers for the cheap